The specter of Prometheism is synonymous with the retrieval and cultivation of the only ethos capable of enduring that imminent global catastrophe, commonly known as the technological singularity. This singularity, emerging from out of a convergence of various advanced technologies, confronts us with the prospect of the end of humanity, the end of history, and the end of reality. This tripartite distinction is not arbitrary, but expresses the three most elemental dimensions of the revolutionary or evolutionary transformation of our existence through the daemonic power of technological science, as already expressed in my concept of the spectral revolution. Genetics, robotics, information, and nanotechnology, GRIN, threaten all of the boundary conditions that have hitherto defined human nature. Genetic engineering promises to drastically extend the human lifespan, eliminate all heritable diseases, boost the immune system, make it easier to build muscle mass, and most importantly, increase mathematical and spatial reasoning, as well as memory capacity to superhuman levels hitherto only achieved by computers. At the same time, the robotics revolution finally promises to bring all human drudgery to an end. When combined with advances in information technology that are yielding specialized AI or expert systems, robots will be able to outperform humans in every field of labor that does not involve the most dynamic forms of creativity and the artful imagining of new ideas. When one considers the potential of nanotechnology, the projected impact of this robotics revolution on economics and industry becomes mind-blowing to contemplate. Ultimately, almost anything could be manufactured by anyone through the rearrangement of feedstock on a molecular level inside of tabletop machines that are the successors of today's three-dimensional printers. Meanwhile, if biotechnology has not cured cancer, even the most metastasized cases of it, including those affecting the brain and spine, could be dissolved by nanobots performing hitherto impossibly precise surgery at a molecular level under superhumanly intelligent control. The cybernetic combination of biotechnology, including cloning, and robotics at a nanoscale of engineering will make any damage to the body possible to repair and any organ easy to replace. Taken together, it seems that genetics, robotics, information, and nanotechnology promise us an evolution into a race of supermen. Genetic engineering will bring an end to the exclusive sexual dimorphism that has thus far been characteristic of the human species. The psychological power of archetypal androgyny is such that, in the context of contemporary hormone replacement therapy and plastic surgery, it has already led to the rapid rise of a transsexual community. Consequently, the widespread CRISPR-style gene hacking of tomorrow, when taken together with cybernetic modifications by means of nanotechnology, will undoubtedly yield veritable hermaphrodites as a significant subset of the post-human population. GRIN technologies also confront us with the prospect of bringing about an end of humanity in ways that are much more deeply disturbing and disconcerting. For example, the prospect of the splicing of human and animal genes leading to the transformation of certain species of animals into chimera that possess certain quasi-human or even superhuman characteristics. What was envisioned in Planet of the Apes pales in comparison to some of the monstrous possibilities in play here. Then there is the attempt to replicate human intelligence inside of a silicon-based neural network. The Terminator franchise has made it clear what a Frankenstein's monster artificial intelligence could become, especially if the murderous post-human AI in question has a race of inhuman robots under its control. What if this AI could also hack programmable nanobots? Instead of an accidental or randomly generated virus that results in nanobots melting the molecular structure of everything in the world, our bodies included, into a gray goo, what if an AI were to seize control of these nanobots and use them to recode the molecular structure of the natural world, cityscapes, and even our own brains, in ways that suit purposes that remain inscrutable to merely human minds? The Terminator films also contemplated AI and robotics in the context of time travel. This science-fictional projection is perfectly reasonable, considering the fact that the problem of manipulating the space-time continuum is one of the achievements that has eluded mere mortals, and one of the higher goals that a superhuman intelligence could be expected to set for itself. Whether travel through time is accomplished by purely mechanical means, such as the shearing of the space-time fabric by a device like the infamous bell developed by the SS in Project Kronos, or whether it is partly or wholly psychical in nature, time travel confronts us with the prospect of the end of history. In the history of philosophy, the end of history has signified an abstract concept for the culmination of a teleological or purposive, goal-directed process of historical progress. G.W.F. Hegel conceived of this in terms of the evolution of consciousness by means of dialectical tensions at work in the psychosocial structure of all domains of human life, from religion and science to artistic styles and political systems. Karl Marx reinterpreted this dialectical development in reductively material terms, seeing the change in economic systems and the human relations involved in various modes of production as the key to all other transformations, whether scientific, religious, or political. He endeavored, by means of this reductive analysis, to render history as scientific as other domains of knowledge. Friedrich Nietzsche altogether rejected the Hegelian and Marxist conception of a law-like material and moral progress toward a utopian end of history. Rather than seeing any logical process of progression as intrinsic to psychosocial development, Nietzsche saw a struggle for power, not mere survival as Darwin had postulated, as characteristic of the evolutionary life force. If there is an end of history, it is that moment when techno-scientific development, driven solely by the will to power, reaches a point past which it affords us the practical capability to transform ourselves into superhuman beings whose projects are supported by an equally post-human species of subhuman robots. Nietzsche was one of the first thinkers to envision what is now widely referred to as the artificial speciation of humanity into more than one post-human species. So to him, the end of history meant the end of human history and the beginning of the higher history of the Promethean Superman who has murdered God. With H.G. Wells writing The Time Machine just 5 years before Nietzsche's death, and 5 years after he had been presumptuously declared insane and literally straitjacketed, it could hardly have been conceivable to Nietzsche how much higher than human history the Superman's mode of life could be. Interestingly, The Time Machine, 1895, also involved a Nietzschean artificial speciation of humanity into two different branches of a transhuman society, the godlike Eloi and the monstrously subhuman and subterranean Morlocks. But what remained inconceivable to Nietzsche, and even to H.G. Wells, was that the higher history of the Superman would mean a fifth-dimensional existence encompassing a plethora of 4D spacetimes. Bernard Stiegler sees genetic engineering as a speeding up of evolutionary time. The dialectical relationship between innovation and obsolescence reveals something profound about the ontology of time. In Stiegler's view, Heidegger did not go far enough when his phenomenological analysis demonstrated that technology is ontologically prior to science. Technology is also ontologically prior to time, or space-time. That speed is faster than time is an ontological truth revealed by a machine that breaks the time barrier, quote-unquote, and breaks the whole 4D Cartesian framework of space-time in modern physics together with it. Since the days of Descartes, every schoolboy has been taught that time is a fourth dimension of space. But if it is possible to achieve a speed faster than time, then this entire Cartesian ontology must be scrapped. What is at stake here is not the loss of any particular scientific theory, but the entire pre-theoretical framework and way of reasoning that has been paradigmatic for every theory in physics for the last several centuries. Speed is not a function of time and space. Time is a function of speed, and for that matter, space also becomes thinkable only in terms of speed, since spaces are epochal or enfolded in discrete times. Speed is more primordial than time, and what reveals this is something technological, a device. Stiegler implies that he is talking about a time machine. This could be Ronald Mallet's design for a machine that warps space so as to be able to send particles back in time through a tunnel of laser beams. It could also be a spaceship traveling into the future of Earth by approaching the speed of light. These are two examples of time machines that would represent a technological realization of what F.T. Marinetti heralded in the Futurist Manifesto, when he anticipated Stiegler by declaring that technologically engineered speed can overpower spacetime. To put it in mythic terms, this would be to torture and perhaps even murder the Titan Kronos, the god of time. Even if we take the simplest and most uncontroversial type of time travel, namely travel into the future through space travel at near the speed of light, the psychosocial and biological implications force us to think beyond human limits. Think of what happens here. By the time the spacecraft turns around to come home, the home that one knew is gone because hundreds of years have elapsed on Earth, whereas the astronauts have experienced the journey as taking only a few months or weeks. The device, the spaceship qua time machine, is allowing the techno-scientifically empowered man to overpower time and travel as far into the future as his will determines. Earth, with the lived experiences of everyone on it, is warped by the tremendous speed of a machine, crushed like a tin can, and made to become Earth in the future at a time of one's choosing. A civilization that routinely sent spaceships out from the Earth or any colonized planets at near the speed of light and then had them return from these missions would be so radically different from any society known to history that it has to be considered post-historical, if not post-human by comparison. Hundreds or even thousands of years would elapse on the home world, whereas only a few years, or in the case of cryogenic hibernation, maybe only a few days, would have passed for those on board the spaceship before they returned to their point of origin. A society capable of fielding such missions would require a political stability so far exceeding that of any society known to history that it is almost unthinkable. Try to imagine a government capable of sustaining hundreds of Apollo-type projects that would each span thousands of years before the astronauts sent out on any of these missions could be safely returned. For one thing, this would be impossible without a significant extension of the human lifespan through genetic engineering. Even then, analyzing, let alone managing, the psychological and social factors involved in fielding such enterprises of exploration and exploitation demands a superhuman intelligence. This is, however, nothing by comparison to the complexity involved in time travel to the past, or to what had been the past before being altered by the time travelers. Despite the protests of overly rationalistic logicians, it may be possible to retroactively change history in a manner akin to retroactive collapse of the wave function in the case of Schrödinger's cat, with its cells suspended in a ghostly quantum superposition between life and death. The Mandela effect suggests that it is not the case that only unobserved past events are susceptible to retropsychokinesis. Moreover, there are tantalizing physical traces suggestive of time travelers who may have already effaced a different version of the present or futures that may now never come to pass. The capability to time travel, whether by mechanical or psychical means, or some synthesis thereof, would indeed be the greatest weapon in the most terrible war of all, the Change War. What human being could bear the thought of being subjected to repeated revisions of the timeline of his life, tragically losing what would have been lifelong loves, or facing the horror of holocausts that, in an earlier version of history, had not shattered all of his hopes? Who could tolerate being the plaything of fifth-dimensional gods? No one other than the Prometheus who joins their ranks himself, perhaps with much nobler ideas about how to shape histories. It is possible that this means something like hacking through the coding matrix of a simulation and becoming one of its programmers. The simulation hypothesis offers us the most coherent ontological explanation of what it would mean to change the past, and one which, unlike the many worlds interpretation of quantum theory, manages to also preserve some degree of free will. In line with the hypothesis that we are living in a computer simulation, changing the past would be a question of gaining access to an archived past state of play and replaying the simulation forward again in a different way from how the game was played out the first or second or 32nd time. One reason why denizens of an advanced civilization might design simulations on the scale of our own world is to develop a science of history of the kind that, as suggested above, Hegel and Marx were aiming at. The only way to really develop scientifically rigorous models of historical change in societies of a certain type and to predict their transformation into other types or stages of societies would be to simulate a variety of alternate timelines. Changing variables over and over again would afford the programmers the opportunity to observe how the conscious artificial intelligences inside the simulation, namely beings such as we might be, would react differently on a psychosocial and inter-societal level. Eventually, these observations could lead to the development of testable hypotheses about what kind of trajectories could be expected of certain types of societies and how these societies could be re-engineered in relatively predictable ways by altering particular variables. Different scales of time dilation on various levels of layered simulations comparable to the incommensurate timescales of dreams within dreams could allow the programmers to observe these simulated histories in something akin to fast-forward mode. Working through avatars of putative time travelers to manipulate variables within many such parallel processed simulations, laws of history could emerge from out of the computer systems of the programmers in a fraction of the time it took for the psychohistorians of Isaac Asimov's Foundation to arrive at a scientific understanding of historical phenomena. Whether such a lofty goal motivates the programmers of our simulation, or whether it is just a gigantic arena of entertainment for sadistic archons who enjoy entering into games like the Second World War, there are unfortunately good reasons to take the simulation hypothesis seriously. Numerous hitherto puzzling aspects of quantum physics make much more sense when they are set in the context of what we know about how computer games work. So-called quantum superposition and wave-particle duality may just be optimization functions of a computer system that does not render any part of the coding matrix that is not being observed by at least one conscious participant inside the simulation. That would afford quite a lot of optimization indeed, and save a great deal of processing power, especially if it were the case that most of the people inside the simulation are actually non-player characters rather than conscious AIs or avatars of the programmers. The quantized quality of space-time itself, which is counterintuitive based on our experience of spatial continuity and our experiential time continuum, is exactly what one would expect of a pixelated world. The Planck length of quantum physicists could just be describing the magnitude of a single pixel. What Einstein found objectionable as the spooky action at a distance of quantum entangled particles might simply be a coding sequence akin to the kind of instruction programmed into video games to make sure that when a certain set of pixels changes against a fixed background, another seemingly disparate grouping of them always also changes at the same time. In other words, while seeming to be distinct pixels, or as the case may be, particles observed by quantum physicists, these entities are actually images projected from a deeper and hidden level, namely that of the programming code, wherein they are not as distinct as they seem to be. David Bohm referred to this deeper subquantum level of the universe as the implicate order, and compared it to the seemingly chaotic swirl of interference patterns on a piece of holographic film that is only unfolded into a holographic projection when subjected to a beam of laser light. Bohm saw many of the properties of a hologram at work in the paradoxical non-locality and entanglement of quantum physical phenomena. He ultimately concluded that we are living inside something like a dynamic hologram, a holographic universe. We truly arrive at the end of reality when we realize that holographic universes may be nested within one another the way that dreams with different time dilations can sometimes be. Many phenomena hitherto deemed paranormal make sense in the context of the simulation hypothesis, whether in the form of the holographic universe theory or in terms of other models of global, if not cosmic scale simulation. Telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis, teleportation, reincarnation, and even astrology are no longer anomalous once we accept that putative laws of nature are just programming code in the physics engine of a game, and that meaning structures such as karma and synchronicity are part of the storytelling fabric of a cosmos that has an intrinsically and intentionally narrative structure. This is very much akin to Heraclitus' concept of the cosmos as logos. The question is how much control we dare to demand over telling the story that we are a part of. Before assuming a Promethean stance with respect to that question, we would first have to face the end of reality. Realism and rationalism that is based on a verificational conception of truth as an adequate mirroring of objective reality by acquired knowledge has to be abandoned in favor of radical pragmatism. The truth is what works, what we have the power to make happen, and, as Arthur C. Clarke prophetically claimed, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. How many people are ready to live in a world that is undeniably recognized as magical, especially if it requires swallowing the bitter red pill that those who currently control this prison planet are black magicians? What if these occulted techno-priests even have the power to pull the plug on our simulation? If those within it aspire to break out or simply demand a world that is on par with that of the programmers, and therefore too taxing for whatever information processing system is the substrate of this virtual reality. The end of humanity, history, and reality, or what we could call the end of all things that we are entering, is a singularity that will bring about a qualitative transformation in our way of being. Modern sociopolitical systems, such as universal human rights and liberal democracy, are woefully inadequate for dealing with the challenges posed by these developments. This end of all things represents a world state of emergency, which is my concept for a state of emergency of global scope that also demands the establishment of a world state.